Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video we will be looking at web page building blocks. So let's go ahead and open up Sublime. Now before you begin creating a website, it's important to start with a wireframe and a sitemap. Writing code might be intimidating, but it all comes down to structuring and organizing your content. So wireframes can be thought of in two ways. There's the actual HTML code of the wireframe, and then there's the visual result of what you actually see. So I'm just going to do a search for wireframe images to give you kind of an idea. Let me find one that is pretty traditional. Alright, so here is an image. Let me see if I can make this larger so we can take a look at it. On the left we see a high fidelity mock-up of what this CNN website looks like, and then on the right we see a wireframe version of what that website looks like. So traditionally you'll see some sort of icon logo. Normally it's in the left. Here it's in the center. You also find different search options up in the top. Usually this is where your header will be, along with your navigation. And then below that we have our main section. And at the bottom is where we have our footer. So those are going to be words that you're going to need to become familiar with. And so when you are planning out your websites, you want to think about what the visual side of it's going to look like. And then you need to think about how the code structure is going to support that. Now, another term that you want to become familiar with is the idea of a sitemap. Here is an image of what a sitemap might look like, and this is how the navigation of the website breaks down. So when you go to the first page, it's called My Page, then on the top primary navigation, you would see these 4 different pages: about me, contact me, my portfolio, my links. And then underneath of these, you might have a drop-down menu that would take you to further information on each page. So you want to consider what your sitemap is going to look like, because this is actually going to affect the structure of how you save your information into different folders. Alright, so I have Sublime opened up. We're going to go ahead and start a file. You can work with the template file. Usually I'm going to start from scratch just to go through the practice of it. I would suggest you do the same. You might notice that you have to continually switch from plain text to HTML. So we're going to type in doctype HTML. We want to make sure that we have our comment, your name, and today's date. Then we're going to create our HTML opening tag. We're going to go ahead and add language equals English. We're going to go ahead and close our HTML. Add in our head opening end tags, our body opening and end tags. And we're going to go ahead and create a wireframe. So in the head section, we're going to add a title. We're going to call it wireframe tags. End it with a title. We're going to add our meta character set equal to UTF-8. And we haven't saved this yet. Let's go ahead and hit File, Save. I'm going to save this to the desktop. I'm not going to put it in a folder yet. We're going to call this wireframe. Wireframe. Make sure it's saved as HTML file. I'm going to hit save. So we're going to look at a couple of different types of element tags and add them to our code as we go along. Tags will have attributes and values. This goes into how we can style them. If a tag is styled, then all items with the same tag will be styled the same way. We will go over later how you can change specific items to have their own tag. So we're going to start with heading elements. There are 6 different headings, and they're listed as H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. So in our body section, let's go ahead and add some headings. So I'm going to write heading 1. We'll do H2. We'll call it heading 2. I keep forgetting that it's automatically adding and finishing my code for me. H4, heading 4, H5, heading 5, and then H6, heading 6. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's open up our file in a browser. So I have this saved on my desktop. So depending on whichever browser you are using, the default styles might look a little bit different. Alright, I'm going to open this in Chrome as well. So now I have my code on the left. I have it open in Firefox in the top and then Chrome in the bottom. So we can kind of take a look. The styles are mostly the same. There might be slight differences in how they're styled. For example, heading 6 looks a little different between the two of them. So you do want to take into consideration that the code won't look exactly the same in how it's presented in different browsers. Another element that we're going to want to take a look at, and we looked at it with the template, is creating a paragraph, which is designated with a P. This is a paragraph. So I could hit save, refresh, and you'll notice that this text has a slightly different style to it and is actually larger than some of these headings. Usually you'll stick to the first 3 headings. You're not typically going to need to use more than this. It depends on the page. And I don't want you to get too caught up in the styles of the headings. Really, when you're working with HTML, you are focusing on the structural hierarchy of information versus when you actually want to style and choose based off of size. That's where you are going to designate your styles with CSS. So it's more about the structural hierarchy. A heading is always going to be seen as being kind of higher up on that hierarchy than a paragraph is going to. So even if it's smaller, a heading is going to be seen as being more important than the paragraph. So keep that in mind while you're working. So let's go ahead and add a couple of paragraphs. We'll write this is another, actually let's do, this is the first paragraph. We'll do this is the second paragraph. And we'll do 3. This is the third paragraph. I'll hit save, refresh these pages so that way we can see what they're going to look like. Now the next item I want us to take a look at is going to be the line break, which is designated with BR. Now this is one of the few elements where you don't actually need to have an end tag. There's not too many of them, but you want to make sure you remember which ones they are. So this is going to create a line return. So if I add a couple of those and refresh the pages, if I refresh the pages, we'll see that there are some spaces in between the items on our page. Now I'm going to remove these so we don't have so many. We could alternate them, perhaps have a couple in between. Another item we can create is a horizontal rule. This is written with HR. Again, it doesn't have an end tag. I'm going to hit save and refresh, and you'll notice it creates a line that goes across and it breaks up the screen. So you could use this as a way of separating information. There's going to be other ways in the future that we can create containers to contain and group information, but this is definitely a method that you can use to create a horizontal designation between information. Another item that we're going to take a look at is the block quote. So let's go to the internet and look up quotes. I was expecting for us to see inspirational quotes. I might actually just take this first about this quote about quotation marks. I'm going to copy this and insert it inside of my block quote. I'm not indenting any of these, and that's because none of them are nested inside of each other. They're just items that are after each other. So again, I'll hit save. I'll go back here and refresh. And you'll notice what's happening is it's indenting on the sides and it's pulling it in like a quote, like you would see if you were reading a textbook or a magazine article. So you can use this to structurally designate when information is being used as a quotation. Now, there are different types of phrase elements. These help the browser to interpret styles. For example, strong is like bold, but if a screen reader was looking at the text and reading it out loud, it would know to say the word with a stronger voice. So you could use bold to designate if you want your text to actually be bold, or you could also type in strong. So I could type in B. Let me save this. Whoops. Forgot my end tag. So I could type in B before and after my paragraph, and it's going to bold that paragraph. Or I could actually type in strong. And save that and refresh. And you'll notice that it's going to visually look the same, but if a screen reader was looking at it, it would know to voice that information in a strong way and emphasize it. So I'm going to condense this a little bit. We're starting to have to kind of scroll a little. So I'm going to remove, let's see, let's remove this first paragraph. We can keep these two, we can keep our quotes. I want us to have at least one break. I'm going to just see how this looks. We're gonna add the break for the block quote, just so you have a variety still of these, where you have a little bit of each in your example. Okay, so we're going to create some lists. So the first one we're going to create is going to be an ordered list. So after our block quote, we are going to create an ordered list by typing in OL. We'll want to have our end tag. And anytime that you are creating a list and you are creating different items within the list, you want to indent them because those items are contained within the list. So to create a line item, you're going to create LI and you're going to want to end it. So here we could type in item 1. Let's do a couple. Item 2. Let's do another item 3. Now order lists focus on the information being numbered in some way that shows that the items should be ranked in a certain way, or maybe it's a recipe and those items need to be followed in a certain way, but it designates that there's a certain expected order. So you want to keep that in mind when you're choosing. Now you can't, the default, let's save this, refresh. Now the default is that you're going to have numbers, but you can actually choose these types and change, so you can use letters, you can use Roman numerals if you wanted to. Same as if you were working in a word editor. So to change the type, we can actually go here, and this is a little outdated. A lot of times you're going to want to do this in CSS, but for now we're just going to focus on this. So we're going to type in type, and then quotes, we'll type in A, hit save, refresh, and you'll see that these lists end up now being represented with ABC instead. Now next we're going to create an unordered list, which will be written with UL. This is going to be your bullet point type list, which designates that you have a list of items, but they aren't necessarily supposed to be followed in a particular order. Now we'll still have our line items designated with LI, so we can again do item 1, item 2, item 3, and here we'll see next to each other they have bullet points instead. And just like with the type for the ordered list, you can add type. You can add types for the unordered list. So a couple examples would be disc, circle, square. Again, these are better to do in CSS, and you might actually find that when you validate your code, you might get a warning. It's a little different than getting an error, but you might get a warning that's suggesting that this is sort of an outdated method and that it would be better to use CSS. That will be fine for your homework, but it's just something to consider for the future. So a third type of list we're going to look at is the description list, which is written with DL. And it's different than these other lists because we're not going to use the line item, and instead we're going to work with information in pairs. And this is probably one of the elements that I've seen students struggle with the most. So everything needs to be contained with a DL. The information is used like a FAQ, where you might have a question that's being asked and then an answer that's associated with it. So you're going to have two sets of information that are paired with each other. So before in the other list, we were just listing items. These are pairs of items that go with each other. And that structure is really important. You wouldn't want to use a DL, let's say, instead of a heading and a paragraph. because they imply a slightly different structure to them. So if you like this style of a list, but you don't actually want that structure, you would actually be better off to instead create a heading and a paragraph and then style it so it looks more like the description list. Alright, so like I said, there's going to be partnered information. And so there is the description term. Might also call this a data term. So you might also see this used in addition to an epoch key. You might see this used as like in a dictionary to say what a word is and what the definition might be. So here I'm just going to type in term. And then we'll have our data that is going to be associated with it. And then we could have a couple more. We could have term 2. We could actually go and add some numbers. So term 1, data 1, term 2. Data 2. So again, remember, these need to be partnered. If you don't have a data to go along with your term, you're going to get an error. If you have a term in your data, but you don't have them actually in a list, you'll also get an error. So you want to make sure that you write these in this order. So I'm going to hit save. We'll refresh. And we can kind of take a look. So you'll see the information ends up being a little offset from each other. So here we would have perhaps our question, and then we could have a little paragraph that's going to go into the answer for that information. So we looked at Canvas the other day and how to work with special entity characters. I'm going to go back and try to find that link. So you'll find that certain characters cannot be written as just the character. If we were to type one of these up, we would get an error when we try to validate it. HTML5 and browsers have become pretty lenient in that you might actually see it being shown, but it won't validate and it'll end up affecting your website's performance ultimately. So it's good to type these in correctly. In your homework assignment, they have you use copyright in the bottom of your footer. And so here would be an example where if you wanted to create the copyright symbol, you would need to type in ampersand copy semicolon. So we could go ahead and add that. We could type in a paragraph, type in copyright, ampersand copy semicolon, say 2019, and then end our paragraph. So you can refer to this list in your textbook for a full list of different special entity characters and how to write them. This is going to be a very common one that you will encounter. I'm going to hit save, refresh these pages, so you will now be able to see copyright here. So another special entity character that is going to be important is the non-breaking space character. So what this is going to do, let's add one just right here, NBSP, and then we'll add a couple more just to make it clear what's happening. So if I hit save and refresh these pages, you'll notice that space is added before the number. So otherwise, our spaces wouldn't be recognized. We would have a bit of space just by hitting space while we're typing, but this helps push the text beyond that, since white space isn't recognized when working in HTML. So I'm going to remove this. We're going to try this again in another spot in just a second. Now that we know basic elements, we're going to take a look at how to structure things a little bit more. So another element that's very useful in working with structuring information is the div element, also known as division. It allows you to put specific information into a block. So if we kind of look at our information, we might want to group all of our list items together. So I'm going to hit return just so we have a little bit of space. This isn't going to affect anything visually. This is just going to make it easier for us to see. So here I'm going to type in div for the opening tag. And then after the DLN tag, I'm going to end our div item. And again, I'm going to highlight everything inside, and I'm going to just hit tab and indent it in so I can visually tell that everything is nested inside. Div is a common way to create a container that allows for you to structurally group information. Once we start working with styles, we'll see how we can actually apply styles to div containers and work with grouping information that way. Right now everything is more just structural. So if we hit save and we refresh our pages, we're not going to see any differences. This is more of a wireframe type change that gives us the potential later on to actually specify that group of information and exclude information that is not in that container. Now, HTML5 has some semantic elements. These are common elements that were created because people would use the same terms over and over again. So before HTML5, if people wanted to group information, they had to create these div containers. And people started to notice that a lot of times people were creating a div container and using, perhaps this information was all in a navigation. And so they would create this div, give it a unique name, and use it as a navigation. So rather than having to create a div and give it a class or an ID, people actually went ahead and created a couple of different types of elements that act as types of containers. So if we think back to that wireframe we looked at, you might think of the header going across the very top of the page. Now this is one that often gets confused with the head section. Again, the head section sends information to the browser. It's not visual in any way. So typically what you would have is at the very top of the body section, you might have a header. This is where we could have a title. I'm going to remove the one I added at the bottom. Oops. So we might have a header here, and then we might have a navigation. We'll just put some placeholders in, link 1. We'll replace these. And I'm just adding some spaces. We'll do 3 links. And we don't need a space after that one. So header, navigation including all the different links to different pages. And sometimes people might put these in slightly different orders. You might have a navigation at the very top instead and have that header with the image below. You might have them nested inside of each other. And then usually you'll have a main section. And this will contain essentially your main content. So we can actually include everything in here in this main section. So this kind of everything that's the main content. And I'm just going to indent this so I can think of it as all being inside that container. And then another one that you will commonly use will be the footer. And I'm going to put our copyright inside of the footer. Might indent that in so that way we can tell that it's nested. And again, if I refresh, it's not going to change anything. We did add up here a title in our heading, and we might actually want to do it more like this. H1 title. So that way we have our title page, we have a couple of links, and then we have our actual main content, and then our footer. So it's not really changing a whole lot, but it helps a lot structurally with figuring out information. And then once we start adding styles, we can specify we want our styles for the everything in the header section to be styled a certain way. We want everything within the navigation to be styled a certain way, and so on and so forth. So next we're going to take a look at the anchor element, which is used to specify hyperlinks to information. So a good example of where we might want to do that is with our link. Right now we just have text and it doesn't take us anywhere. So rather than having just link, we would want to change this. So to create an anchor link, you'll type in A and then href. This will be the hyperlink reference equals, and then inside the quotes, we can either link to a page that is locally stored. So if you are publishing this to your student server space and you have the two different pages, let's say one of them was your index.html, they're in the same folder, you can just save it this way and it would reference that page. Or let's say you had the yurts file, you just type in yurts.html. Let's just go ahead and stick to index. And then we would end this is the opening tag, so we're going to end that. And then after this is where we're going to actually create the visible name. So we could say home page, and then we have to do our closing tag for that. So this is going to create a link to a page that is stored on that local server space. So let's go and take a look at link 2. We'll create another link. We'll do ahref equals, and this time we'll do a link to an external page. So we might just do the JCCC website. So here we would have to add in http://jccc.edu. We're gonna end our beginning tag, and then we put our name. So let's do JCCC website, and then our end tag. So I'm going to hit save, refresh these. Now you'll see we actually have pages. If I click on this, I'm going to get an error because I don't have a file on my desktop that is named index, and so it's not actually linking anywhere. If I click on this one though, it will go to the appropriate website. So you want to make sure that your links are actually going to the right place. Another common error I've seen is people writing their links wrong. So if you are linking to index, you need to make sure your file is actually called index. You want to make sure you don't have any spaces. If you have a space, it's not going to properly work as a link. So when you are coming up with your names, you also want to make sure that the names match and that you don't have any disparities between them. You don't have any awkward spaces. I recommend naming your files so they're all lowercase. And if you did want to add information, if you did want to create kind of a space and designate two words, I would put a line between them. You could do an underscore line, but this is going to be a lot harder to see when someone is actually typing up the link. So we're going to go ahead and leave that. Now when you are creating your link, you can create different types. So you could create a targeting hyperlink. So in this opening tag, we could actually add some information. You just want to make sure you hit space so you have a little bit of space between them. And here I can type in target equals underscore blank. And what that's going to do is it's going to open the link in a new window. So rather than it being the same window, it's going to open in a new window. So an absolute hyperlink is a link to a website on another page. So that's the one that we did here with the JCCC. A relative hyperlink is a link to an HTML page within your own website. A block anchor allows everything in a block to be an anchor link. Now, when you are creating links, you want to think about accessibility. Use descriptive text so that people know what they are clicking on. So for example, link 3 isn't very helpful. We don't know where we would be going to with link 3. Here we have a good idea of where we're going to go, JCCC website. So another type of link we're going to look at is an email link. So at the very bottom in our footer, we have our copyright. We're going to go ahead and hit return, and we're going to create an email link. So we could even put this in a paragraph, type in your name. We'll do ahref equals, and then mail to, you want to make sure there's no spaces, colon, and then email address. Actually, let's do student ID at jccc.edu. I know yours look a little bit different with students.jccc or however it goes, but you would just want to type in your actual email. And then here we could type in our title. So we might say, click here to email me, or something of that nature, and then end our tag. So let's go ahead and hit save, refresh. So we have your name, click here to email me. So clearly giving people directions of what they can do. If we click on it, it would open up the person's email and then take them to that, and then populate that address in their email. All right, so this is getting a little messy. We can go ahead and save, but I want us to go ahead and start a new file. Again, I'm going to make sure I switch this to HTML. I'm going to save as, I'll do wireframe 2. If you want to, you can copy over your template information. And I'm going to close these because that's for our last file. So in the body section, we're going to go ahead and add header. nav, main, and then there are a couple other semantic HTML elements we're going to look at later in the semester. We'll go ahead and add a footer. These are the ones that you are going to need when you are working on your homework and your assignments. There are a couple other ones like section and article, which we could go ahead and add in here. I found it ends up getting confusing if we take a look at those, so we'll leave this for now. And actually, let's go ahead and add our information to the head section. So let's title this wireframe meta character set equals UTF-8. Our header, we'll create an H1. What is a wireframe? For our nav, we'll leave this for now. In our main section, we'll create a paragraph. We'll say in an HTML file, the wireframe tags define the overall structure of the document. We'll create another paragraph and we'll say wireframe tags provide meaning to the file. Semantic HTML5 wireframe tags include. So we'll have 3 paragraphs, then we'll create an unordered list. So we'll do line item, header, nav, and these are the ones that we mentioned that we're not going to use in this actual file. We'll create section, article, and then we'll add footer. And then in our footer, we'll go ahead and add a paragraph. Say created by your name, and then the date. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's actually open this in a browser so we can take a look at these next to each other. So let's change this paragraph. We have semantic HTML5 wireframe tags include. Let's change this to an H2. Just make it stand out a little bit more. So if we refresh this, we'll see this stands out a little bit. We'll add a list type to the UL to be square. So now these are going to look like they're square. Add small and italics to the footer. Oops. I want to make sure I have my forward slash. We'll add an italic. You want to make sure that whichever order you have these, that they go in the same order. So this is going small, italic, paragraph, and then we should have a mirror version. Paragraph, italic, small. So now we have our text in our footer is a little smaller and it's italicized. Let's add an email link. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a break after the paragraph. So to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to have small and italic up here, our paragraph, so you can kind of see these separate. And then we'll create another paragraph where we'll have, say, your name, anchor link, mail to, I'm just going to type mine in. Whoops, I forgot to end it. So now it says your name, click to email me. It should pop up. Alright, so we're going to save this. And then next I want us to create a folder to put our file in. So I'm going to move this over. So we have our wireframe. Create a new file. I'll just call this wireframe as well. Put this inside of here. I'm going to close out of this just because we now have it inside of this folder. So how it's being referenced is going to be different. So I'm going to reopen this. And then I want us to copy the file and make a second page. So let's go ahead and let's save as, call it homepage. Save it as in HTML. Let's save. Open up wireframe 2 so we have both of them at the same time. So this is where we can go back to our navigation and we can create our links. Now on our homepage we don't actually need a link to that page. So what we're going to do is create a link to wireframe2.html. Here we would call it wireframe. End it. So this would be the second link in our navigation. First one we could just create some text that will just say homepage. Let me open this up. So on our homepage, we have just plain text here, and then we have wireframe. And then what we'd want to do is the opposite on our other page. We can actually create some spaces if we wanted to. Hit save. I'm going to just highlight this, copy it, bring this over, highlight this, replace it, and we'll do the reverse on the wireframe page. So on this page, I'll create a link. It's going to be to homepage.html, and we'll have this be called homepage. End it. We'll still have our spaces. And then over here, we can remove this and instead write wireframe. I can hit save, refresh these, and then if I click on this, we should kind of see the opposite. So we can now go back and forth between these two pages. Alright, so now that we have this, we can actually go and validate our code. So I'm going to go to week 1 and there is a link to the HTML validator there. You'll also see there's some links just to give you basic information. There's history of the internet, which is a video I want you to watch that goes over the basic history of the internet. Just a general link again to the W3 schools. Section 508, which goes over accessibility, ordered list type, unordered list type, special entity characters. So if you want to look at those more, very bottom one then is HTML validator. So I'm going to open this up here and we can go ahead and upload our file. Check out homepage and we can check it. And this is actually great. We have some errors here. We can go ahead and we can correct. So this is saying that the type for square is obsolete. So like I told you, it's going to recommend that you use CSS instead. Your homework wants you to do it this way. I would just go ahead and do it the way your homework. I'm not going to count off for doing it this way, but it is a better idea to use CSS instead. Here we have the element P is not allowed as a child of element I in this context. So it wants our style to instead, and you can use this information. So this is saying from line 20, it's not always going to be exact, but we'll give you kind of a good idea to start. So here we can look at 20. This is the actual line, so it's giving this error. So here we can go to this one where it says line 30. And so what it really means is the line right above it. And it does not like I being in this order. So we can try some other things instead. Alright, so what we can do, since we were getting errors about the order, is rather than having italics and small outside of the footer, we can actually put them inside the paragraphs. This is going to be different than your homework. Your homework doesn't have it listed as paragraphs, and so it's fine for you to actually add italics and small outside the paragraph, but for paragraphs, it wants you to have these styles on the inside of the paragraph. So we're going to write this out for each one. So I'm going to do italic small, and then before the end, I'm going to do the opposite, small, italic. So I'm going to hit save, and then we'll go ahead and check. And now the only error that we have is going to be the type attribute, which is fine. We can check our other page, which has those same errors. So we'd want to come over here. We can ignore this type. So again, instead of having this on the outside of the paragraph, it wants us to add it to the inside and make sure to do it in kind of a mirrored order. And again, once we start working with CSS, instead of doing all of these styles as part of the HTML, we're going to do these styles as part of the CSS. So small, italic, hit save, and we can check again. And this is as good as this can get. I'm not going to count off for these sort of errors in your code just because your textbook is telling you to do it this way, and it's more of a warning rather than an actual error because it's saying it's obsolete. So that will be fine. Alright, so make sure to take a look at the links under week 1. And if you have any questions, you can email me. This is all we're going to look at for web page building blocks.